The first test is emotional reaction. Most people assume that life's biggest tests appear in the form of major events. A crisis, a failure, a confrontation, or a difficult decision that forces someone to prove their strength. But the reality is much quieter and far more subtle. The first and most important test rarely comes from the situation itself. It comes from the reaction that rises inside the mind the moment pressure appears. When something unexpected happens, the emotional system responds almost instantly. A harsh comment, a setback, a moment of rejection, or a sudden obstacle immediately triggers internal signals. The heart rate increases slightly, attention narrows, and the mind begins searching for a quick response. These reactions happen so quickly that most people do not even recognize them as reactions. They simply feel natural. But this is where the first test begins. Emotions are powerful signals designed to alert us when something in the environment changes. They prepare the body to react quickly. In certain circumstances, this speed is useful, but in many situations, especially those involving conflict, pressure, or uncertainty, emotional speed becomes a disadvantage. When the mind reacts instantly, it often sacrifices clarity for urgency. Consider how often small situations escalate simply because someone reacts emotionally in the first few seconds. A comment that could have been ignored becomes an argument. A criticism that could have been analyzed calmly becomes a personal conflict. A stressful moment that could have been handled quietly becomes chaotic, because everyone involved reacts instead of observing. Most people believe the situation caused the problem. In reality, the reaction created it. The moment emotions move faster than awareness, thinking becomes narrow. Instead of examining the situation carefully, the mind moves into defense or impulse. It begins protecting identity, pride, or emotional comfort. This is why people often say things they later regret, or make decisions they later question. The emotional reaction arrived first, and the mind followed it without pause. What many individuals never notice is that life repeatedly creates these small moments of pressure. They appear in conversations, disagreements, mistakes, delays, and disappointments. None of these moments are extraordinary by themselves, but they quietly test whether someone will react emotionally or remain composed long enough to understand what is actually happening. The individuals who develop cold, calm composure begin recognizing this pattern. They realize that the first challenge is rarely the external situation. The first challenge is controlling the impulse to react. Instead of immediately responding to emotional signals, they create a small pause. That pause might last only a few seconds, but psychologically it changes everything. Inside that pause, the mind regains space. Instead of reacting automatically, the person begins observing the situation more carefully. They notice the tone of what was said, rather than only the emotional impact of the words. They consider the intention behind the action, rather than assuming the worst interpretation. They ask themselves whether the moment actually requires a response at all. This simple shift transforms how pressure is experienced. For most people, pressure creates urgency. They feel the need to act immediately to restore emotional balance. But the cold, calm mind treats pressure differently. It treats pressure as information. Instead of rushing to remove discomfort, it studies the moment that created the discomfort. This is why calm individuals often appear unusually composed during tense situations. While others are reacting emotionally, the calm observer is analyzing. They are noticing how people reveal their intentions through reactions. They see how quickly emotions spread through groups, how one reaction triggers another, and how conflicts grow simply because no one pauses long enough to slow the chain of reaction. Over time, this habit strengthens mental stability. The individual begins trusting their ability to remain steady when situations become difficult. Emotional signals still appear: frustration, irritation, uncertainty, but those signals no longer dictate behavior automatically. The mind becomes capable of experiencing the emotion without obeying it. This ability gradually separates emotional experience from emotional reaction. Many people assume that emotional control means suppressing feelings. In reality, it means something very different. It means allowing the feeling to exist while maintaining authority over the response. The emotion becomes a signal rather than a command. As this skill develops, pressure begins to feel less threatening. Situations that once triggered immediate reactions now feel slower and more manageable. The mind becomes comfortable with silence during tense moments. It becomes comfortable with uncertainty while analyzing a problem. It becomes comfortable with observing other people's reactions without being pulled into them. This calmness is not coldness in the emotional sense. It is coldness in the structural sense. A controlled internal environment where reactions are chosen rather than automatic. The person begins realizing that many situations that appear overwhelming at first lose their intensity once the emotional reaction is delayed. Without immediate reaction feeding the moment, tension often dissolves naturally. Conversations become calmer. Problems become easier to analyze. Decisions become clearer. Gradually, the individual begins seeing pressure differently. What once felt like a threat now feels like a test of composure. Not a test of strength in the traditional sense, but a test of whether the mind can remain steady long enough to think clearly, and the more often someone passes this first test, the test of emotional reaction, the more stable their internal world becomes. Calm minds see what others miss in moments of tension. Most people assume that action is the most important response. When a problem appears, the instinct is to react quickly, to defend, to argue, to correct the situation immediately. Speed feels powerful, immediate reaction feels decisive, but beneath this instinct lies a quiet psychological disadvantage that many people never notice. When the mind reacts too quickly, it stops observing. Human attention narrows when emotions become intense. Stress, anger, frustration, and pressure all trigger a similar internal response. The brain focuses on the immediate problem and filters out surrounding details. From a survival perspective, this narrowing of focus once helped human beings respond quickly to danger. But in modern social environments, this emotional narrowing often prevents people from seeing the larger picture. In tense situations, reactions spread quickly from one person to another. Someone raises their voice, another responds defensively, and the emotional temperature of the room rises almost instantly. As each individual reacts, the environment becomes louder and more chaotic. Ironically, the more emotionally involved people become, the less clearly they understand what is actually happening. This is where calmness begins to create an advantage. When someone remains cold, calm during moments of tension, their attention does not collapse into the narrow tunnel of reaction. Instead, it remains wide enough to observe the entire situation. While others focus on defending themselves or proving their point, the calm observer begins noticing subtle details that emotional minds overlook. They notice tone rather than only words. They notice hesitation rather than only statements. They notice patterns of behavior rather than isolated reactions. These observations provide information that emotionally reactive individuals never see. For example, when someone reacts aggressively during a disagreement, most people respond directly to the aggression. They interpret it as an attack that must be answered, but the calm observer may notice something different. They may notice insecurity behind the aggression, impatience behind the raised voice, or confusion hidden beneath confident words. These subtle signals become visible only when emotional reaction is absent. This is why calmness often creates a quiet form of strategic awareness. While others are busy participating in the emotional exchange, the calm individual is gathering information. They are watching how people behave under pressure. They are noticing which individuals remain composed and which individuals become reactive. They are observing how quickly emotions shift within the group. These patterns reveal more about a situation than the words being spoken. Most people never realize how much information is hidden inside emotional reactions. The way someone reacts under stress often reveals their priorities, fears, and vulnerabilities. When a person becomes defensive, it often points to something they feel uncertain about. When someone becomes aggressive, it often signals that they feel challenged or threatened. But this information is invisible to those who are emotionally involved in the moment. Once someone reacts emotionally, their attention becomes locked on defending themselves or countering the other person's behavior. The mind shifts into a competitive state where winning the interaction becomes more important than understanding it. The calm individual avoids this trap. Because their emotional state remains steady, they do not feel the need to immediately defend their identity or position. Their mind remains curious rather than reactive. Instead of rushing to prove themselves right, they observe the behavior unfolding around them. This ability to observe changes how they interpret difficult situations. While others see conflict, the calm observer sees information. They see how people reveal themselves through emotional pressure. They see which arguments are based on logic and which are driven by insecurity. They see how quickly tension escalates when no one slows the reaction cycle. Over time, this awareness creates a different kind of intelligence. It is not the intelligence of memorized knowledge or quick debate. It is the intelligence of behavioral observation. The calm mind becomes skilled at recognizing patterns in human behavior, patterns that appear repeatedly in conversations, disagreements, and social dynamics. This skill quietly strengthens judgment. When someone has seen enough of these patterns, they begin predicting reactions before they happen. They know which comments will escalate tension and which responses will calm a situation. They know when silence is more effective than argument. They know when stepping back will reveal more information than stepping forward. This is why calm individuals often appear unusually composed during conflict. Their calmness is not passive, it is analytical. While others are emotionally participating in the moment, they are studying it. They are watching the movement of reactions the way a strategist watches the movement of pieces on a board. This perspective gradually changes how pressure feels. Instead of viewing tense situations as something that must be solved immediately, The calm individual begins viewing them as moments of observation. Pressure becomes a lens through which human behavior becomes clearer. People reveal themselves most honestly when they are under emotional pressure. And the person who remains calm during those moments becomes the one who sees what everyone else misses. Discipline over emotional comfort. One of the quietest internal conflicts a person can experience appears in moments when emotions demand action, but clarity demands restraint. In those moments the mind becomes divided. One part pushes toward reaction, to speak immediately, to defend, to argue, to respond quickly so the emotional tension disappears. Another part of the mind recognizes that reacting too quickly may make the situation worse. Most people follow the first impulse. The emotional system is designed to remove discomfort as quickly as possible. When tension appears, the mind looks for immediate relief. Speaking quickly can reduce frustration. Responding defensively can protect pride. Taking action can create the illusion of control. These reactions feel satisfying in the moment because they release emotional pressure, but emotional relief and wise action are rarely the same thing. In many situations, reacting immediately may calm the emotional discomfort inside the mind, yet it creates complications outside the mind. Words spoken impulsively can escalate conflict. Decisions made under pressure can create long-term consequences. Actions taken in anger often produce problems that would never have existed if the mind had paused for a few moments longer. This is where discipline begins to matter. Discipline is often misunderstood as the ability to force oneself to work harder or endure difficulty. But emotional discipline operates in a different space. It is the ability to resist the urge for immediate emotional comfort when that comfort would damage long-term clarity. The difficulty lies in recognizing how powerful the urge for emotional comfort can be. When someone feels insulted, misunderstood, or pressured, the mind wants to restore balance quickly. The easiest way to do this is through reaction. A quick reply, a defensive explanation, or an emotional response can create temporary relief. For a moment, it feels as if the tension has been resolved. But what actually happened is different. The emotional impulse controlled the decision. This pattern becomes especially dangerous when repeated over time. Each time a person reacts impulsively to relieve emotional pressure, the mind learns that reaction is the fastest path to comfort. The next time pressure appears, the same impulse becomes stronger. Eventually, reaction becomes automatic. At this stage, the individual is no longer consciously choosing their responses. Their emotions are choosing for them. Breaking this pattern requires a different kind of strength. The strength to tolerate emotional discomfort without immediately trying to remove it. This is where emotional discipline becomes visible. When a person experiences pressure but chooses not to react immediately, the emotional tension does not disappear instantly. It remains present for a short time. The mind may still feel the urge to respond. Thoughts may repeat themselves, searching for the perfect reply or justification. The disciplined individual learns to sit inside this tension without obeying it. This ability creates a psychological boundary between feeling and action. The person acknowledges the emotion but refuses to allow that emotion to control behavior. Instead of reacting instantly, they allow the situation to unfold for a moment longer. In that small space of restraint, something important begins to happen. The emotional intensity slowly begins to settle. The initial surge of reaction loses some of its power. The mind, no longer overwhelmed by urgency, begins to see the situation more clearly. Details that were invisible during the emotional surge become easier to notice. This is why restraint often leads to better decisions. When the mind slows down, it begins evaluating the broader context. It asks different questions. Does this situation actually require a response? If so, what response would improve the situation rather than escalate it? Is silence more effective than argument? Is patience more useful than speed? These questions rarely appear during emotional reaction. They appear only when discipline creates enough mental space for reflection. Over time, practicing this restraint transforms how pressure feels. Situations that once created overwhelming emotional urgency begin to feel slower and more manageable. The individual becomes familiar with the internal sensation of emotional tension without feeling controlled by it. This familiarity strengthens mental stability. Instead of fearing emotional discomfort, the disciplined mind begins to treat it as a signal that something important is happening. Pressure becomes an invitation to remain steady rather than an instruction to react. Gradually, the person notices a shift in their identity. They stop seeing themselves as someone who must immediately defend their emotions. They begin recognizing themselves as someone capable of maintaining composure, even when situations become difficult. Their reactions become measured rather than impulsive. Their presence becomes calmer even during tense moments. And with each moment of restraint, the mind becomes more confident in its ability to remain steady when emotional turbulence appears. The quiet power of unshakable presence. Imagine a version of yourself that moves through difficult situations, without emotional turbulence taking control. a version of yourself that does not feel the urgent need to respond immediately, defend every statement, or prove anything in the moment. Most people rarely experience this state because their internal stability is constantly tied to what is happening around them. When situations become chaotic, their thoughts become chaotic. When others react emotionally, their own emotions rise to match the environment. This is the normal psychological pattern most people live within. Human beings naturally mirror the emotional energy around them. When someone becomes angry, others become defensive. When someone becomes anxious, tension spreads through the group. Emotional signals move quickly from one person to another, creating an atmosphere where reactions amplify each other. In these environments, calmness becomes rare. The individual who remains composed while everyone else reacts stands out immediately. Their presence feels different. They speak less, observe more, and respond slowly rather than impulsively. At first, others may interpret this behavior as distance or indifference. But over time something more interesting begins to appear. Their calmness begins to influence the environment. When someone refuses to participate in emotional escalation, the reaction cycle begins to weaken. Arguments lose some of their intensity because the expected response never arrives. Provocation becomes ineffective because the calm individual does not respond in the anticipated way. The emotional storm loses momentum. This is where the quiet power of unshakable presence begins to emerge. Power in this sense does not come from dominating conversations or forcing others to agree. It comes from emotional stability. When someone cannot easily be shaken by pressure, criticism, or tension, their mind remains free to think clearly while others struggle to regain control of their reactions. This clarity becomes a form of internal authority. The calm individual is no longer reacting to every signal the environment produces. They choose their responses deliberately. If they speak, it is because they decided the moment requires it. If they remain silent, it is because silence serves a purpose. Their behavior becomes intentional rather than reactive. Over time, people around them begin to notice this difference. In most environments, individuals reveal their emotional triggers quickly. A certain comment creates anger. A certain tone creates defensiveness. A certain criticism produces insecurity. These triggers make people predictable because their reactions can be anticipated. The emotionally steady person becomes difficult to predict because they do not react automatically. Others cannot easily manipulate their behavior. Provocations fail to create immediate responses. Emotional pressure fails to create panic. Situations that would normally create confusion instead reveal opportunities for observation. This unpredictability creates a subtle form of respect. People tend to trust individuals who remain calm during pressure. Stability signals reliability. When others become overwhelmed by stress, they instinctively look toward the person who appears composed. The calm individual becomes a reference point in chaotic situations. Yet the most important transformation does not happen in the social environment. It happens inside the mind of the person who practices this composure. As emotional discipline strengthens, the individual begins experiencing a different relationship with pressure. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. Moments of tension become familiar rather than frightening. The mind becomes confident in its ability to remain steady regardless of what is happening externally. This confidence changes how the person approaches life itself. Instead of avoiding difficulty, they become comfortable facing it. Instead of fearing conflict, they approach it with patience. Instead of reacting impulsively to every challenge, they examine situations carefully before deciding how to respond. Their presence becomes slower, steadier, and more deliberate. They no longer rush to restore emotional comfort when pressure appears. They allow situations to unfold. They allow others to reveal their reactions. They allow the moment to develop before deciding what role they will play in it. Over time, this habit of calm observation reshapes identity. The individual stops seeing themselves as someone who must control every situation. Instead, they see themselves as someone who can remain stable regardless of the situation. Their strength becomes less visible but far more durable. The environment may still produce chaos, pressure, criticism, and uncertainty, but the calm individual moves through those conditions without losing internal balance. Their actions become guided by awareness rather than reaction, by discipline rather than impulse. Life will continue presenting moments that test composure, and the person who learns to remain calm during those moments gradually becomes the one whose stability cannot easily be shaken.